Okay, welcome back to Daily Driven Alpha. It's a bit of a rainy, grey old day here in Brisbane, Queensland, Australia. And luckily last weekend we looked at the weather forecast and we laid some red oxide primer down as a second coat over the car and the doors in anticipation of this weather. So today we're going to be doing a little bit of wet sanding, sort of matches the weather. Look, when you do this, even though you think you've got things right, the beauty about laying down some of this paint and then going back over it again is, as you can see by the reflection of the overhead lights, you start to get the opportunity to find little imperfections like this, that little filler mark there, and we can go back, tidy that up. That'll just take a little bit of sanding and straightening up, and then we'll lay some more primer over it. So, you know, pay attention to detail as you do your finish and your prep. It's those little details that are missed often when I see cars that are sitting at shows that catch your eye, and it lets a beautiful car, well, it doesn't let it down, but it just detracts from you know, the overall impression, because that's what you remember about the car, is the little flaws rather than the beautiful machine that you're looking at. But you can see from the paint on the car, we had issues with the gun last weekend, and we ended up with paint coming out in a textured fashion. We didn't have pressures right, we had an issue with the seal, but we were sort of up against it, and we said, well, let's just lay it on thick and we'll sand it back. So unlike the first time we put the red oxide on the car, we've created a bit more work for ourselves this time, and we'll see how that comes out. I'm hoping we're able to sand this back to a level that's acceptable before we move forward. If we have to, we'll spray another layer of red oxide over it and then sand that back again if we have to. There would be 3 coats of primer on it, but you know, it's not the cost of the paint. I guess at the end of the day we want to make sure that we get it right so that the finish is good. And I guess if you've got good coats of primer underneath there, you know, that's a bonus so far as the stability of the paint goes and the longevity of the paint. You don't want too much on there, but yeah, so the car's coming up pretty good. As you can see, we've got into every nook and cranny that we can, possibly with the guns, and we've even gone into the interior panels. We've gone up underneath the dash as well, and you'll remember in previous videos where we did the floor and we put seam sealer in, that all disappears once you get the red oxide on. But it's good we know that that's there, and that the interior of the car is taken care of, solid. What I want to do is take you out and show you a little bit of what we're doing today. So with this wet weather and this grey weather, we're getting into the doors. This shows you in the light here the issue that we've got with that textured surface. Now, on one hand, it gives us a nice layer of paint that we can lean into, if you like, and really sand back. But it's a double-edged sword, so we've got to watch that we don't go too hard, because we can start to undo the work that we've done previously. And what we're using is, we're just using some wet and dry sandpaper today. Now, we've got 600 grit, and we've also got 400. So we're using this 400, this is dry at the moment, but we're using it in water as wet, as an initial paper to knock down that rough surface, and then we'll come back with a 600 and see what that looks like. So I'll bring you out here, we'll have a look at it. You can see I've already started with some of it, and we're trying to get the surface down to something that's a little bit more reasonable. And I'll just show you some of the considerations as you're sanding, for those of you who are interested, and I'll have a chat to you as I'm doing it. Okay, so one of the things that to be mindful of is make sure you keep the surface clean and all your materials clean. The last thing you want to be doing is taking dirt and grime and grit and rubbing it into the paint. Change your paper regularly. I've just grabbed another piece of paper. It doesn't cost a lot of money. You don't want to be building up material on here and then inadvertently running a score mark across your paint, because remember, this is the surface that is the base for that beautiful mirror finish that you're looking for. You can see with the bubbles, we've just put a little bit of normal household laundry detergent in the water just to help with the lubrication as we sand. And because I've already been sanding a couple of times, I've been leaning into it a little bit, which I've got to be mindful of, but I've already gone through just on the edges here of the door on the top, through into the etch primer, and I can see a little bit of steel. Now, that's something to be mindful of, especially when you're preparing your doors and your vehicle. Try and lay down more paint on your body lines and edges, because naturally they're the ones that are going to sort of suffer as you're sanding first. It's not the end of the world, it just means we have to come back, touch it up again, but be mindful of it. Friends of mine will run masking tape over those edges to protect them. I tend not to do that. I sort of find that the masking tape gets balled up and just annoys me, so I don't do it. And I'll come back and tidy it up later. So just a reminder, with whenever you're sanding, same as when you're doing your prep on your doors with your filler, use a sanding technique where you're going across on an angle on the doors, and do it in both directions, because what that does is it doesn't allow you to rub a particular pattern into the paintwork, and you may not see it when you're first doing it, but it may start to come out in the final coat, because remember, that final coat of paint that you put on is a mirror. It amplifies everything underneath. And like I've said in other videos, people say, wow, what a great paint job. What they should be saying is, wow, what amazing body prep and paint prep, because that final coat of the paint really just reflects everything that's been done before it. So what we're using here is just a flexible foam block. This one's got holes in it. I like it because it retains a bit of moisture on the back of the sandpaper. It's got a slight curve in it now from the way we're using it, which I don't mind, and just using a cloth to keep the moisture onto the door. Don't, at this stage here, even though we've got a textured paint surface, so we're sort of putting a little bit of pressure just into it just to knock that down. We've got to be mindful that we don't rub too hard, because what you are doing, especially with the edges of your sandpaper, and these are sharp, you can end up rubbing score marks into your paint, and once again this will start to reflect into the final paint surface if you're not careful. So let the sandpaper do the work. Don't try and muscle it. Take your time. This is where the hard work is in this final prep area, and if you don't feel it's right, go back, spray it again, and get it right. And I've done this in the past with my daily driver, I was impatient and said, let's just get the doors on, And now as a consequence, every time I'm out at a coffee and cars show or whatever and everyone's looking at the car, my eye is drawn to those little imperfections that I left in there because of my impatience. But you know, I think you see those shows where you get it all done within you know, 48 hours, and we all know that if you're restoring cars, that really isn't how things happen. So take your time, get it right, and it's rewarding. So look, the other thing too is while you're sanding, and I've been sanding too much on this side, I need to get down here. You'll notice that you'll see the paint starting to come off. You'll see it running on the surface. Make sure that you dry it off. Use a foam block or a squeegee or a rubber blade, whatever you've got, to take that off. And what happens is you get a good look at what the surface is like, and you can see how much further you've got to go. That's smoother there than it is there. That's because I've been spending more time here talking to you. And be conscious, constantly check where you're at. You can always go down further, you can't come back once you go too far. So constantly check where you're at, and I'll get to a point now where I'll stop using 400 and then I'll start using 600 because I actually want to get the surface as glassy as possible. And when I say glassy, it's not polished. It will still have score marks in it, and it will still be able to key in the next layer of paint. So you know, you don't ever polish or try and get the base coat as smooth as possible. Also be very mindful of, I'm using my bare hands here, but I've got soap and water in here. But be very mindful of your hands and grease. If you've got nitrile gloves, use them. Fingerprints and body grease on prepped paint is a killer, especially when you start to add other paints. You can start to see the paint will react to that, and you'll have a blemish and an issue in your final coat. And that's one of the things you've got to be very careful of when you go into the spray booth, is you've got to be fastidious in your cleanliness and make sure that you're not sweating, dripping, touching your paint surfaces. Anyway, that's what we're doing today. We're going to spend some time out here and hopefully the weather holds out for us. Doesn't matter if it sprinkles a bit because it's a wet process anyway. And so we're going to get these doors prepped and see how we go. I might even do a little update tomorrow depending on our progress, so you can see some of the final product there. But look, thanks for watching. Hope your projects are going well. Everyone's safe and healthy, and please like, subscribe, share this with your friends and those who are interested. Post your comments as long as they're respectful, and thank you very much for watching. Cheers.